Sicilian volcano Etna, the largest active in Europe, on Tuesday morning threw a column of ash to a height of 9 kilometers. This was announced by the Italian National Institute of Geophysics and Volcanology. Etna's eruption returns after a 20-day hiatus. The ash cloud from this latest activity has reached a height of about 9,000 meters.
Hay una colada aquí que está aislada, pero no sabemos si es una grieta. Ahora en la foto te lo mandé. En el mismo avance, en la base, ha salido otro curso. ¿Quieres comer una planta que se pegó ahí o qué? Hombre, ahí lo bueno sería... Claro, el etno, que han decidido colado. Yo lo que creo que... I think it's probably from the trade, yeah. We'll have to go to the microscope. Salir por otro lado, en esa dirección. Estamos hablando de esta corte hasta el monte. Primero es que en estas horas no se ha atendido a nadie por ningún problema que tenga que ver con el volcán de salud y no tenemos que lamentar ninguna pérdida humana ni daños personales. Creo que esa es la mejor noticia después de las horas de un volcán que sigue activo y que lo va a seguir en los próximos días y que la colada, la lava camina hacia el mar y es previsible que la llegada de la noche sobre las 20 horas pueda alcanzar ya la zona costera. Va a haber esta tarde un nuevo comité director y compareceremos al acabar ese comité para dar toda la información actualizada.
De que ahora mismo lo más importante es garantizar la seguridad, garantizar el perímetro de la seguridad. Y por tanto estamos todavía en la fase de la erupción, de la actividad del volcán. Por favor, extrememos la precaución, no nos aproximemos, estemos distantes, informémonos en el 112, a la Guardia Civil, a la Policía Nacional, en definitiva, todo el operativo que tenemos del sistema de protección civil, porque bueno, pues, el volcán sigue actuando, sigue operando y tenemos que extremar las precauciones.
No, la casa no la ha perdido, pero el volcán está como a 200 metros, entonces nos evacuaron anoche, no por causa del volcán, porque el volcán pues ahora mismo no se mira como el mayor daño de la casa mía, sino los gases, el polvo, el torrillo.
Y no sabe si revienta y corre.
Y entonces esto es una cosa que es como para prevenir, ¿eh?
Magnitude 5.9 earthquake hit southeastern Australia in the state of Victoria at 9:15 a.m. The epicenter of the earthquake was at a depth of 10 kilometers near the small town of Mansfield, 180 kilometers northeast of Melbourne. The tremors lasted for about 20 seconds, although in some areas it was reported that they lasted longer. It was followed by two aftershocks of magnitude 4.0 and 3.1 points. The earthquake shook Melbourne and destroyed part of the building on the famous Chapel Street, with tremors felt even in New South Wales and Tasmania. In Melbourne, several high-rise towers and a city hospital were temporarily evacuated. Although it is one of the largest earthquakes in Australia in recent years, it did not cause significant damage. Prime Minister Scott Morrison said we have had no reports of serious injuries, and this is very good news.
The divisive decision is the latest attempt to curb growing COVID case numbers in the industry.
We put the industry on notice, you'll recall, a week ago that we needed to see a substantial improvement. Since then, we've seen poor compliance and further transmission sites being identified, and that just cannot continue.
Compliance has been a very small issue. Most sites are pretty compliant.
Health authorities said half of the construction sites it inspected failed to meet COVID safety requirements. Out of 6,000 active COVID cases across Victoria, 337 are linked to building sites. While the CFMEU encourages its members to get vaccinated, it doesn't want to see jabs become mandatory.
I've said all along, our union, our building industry group of unions has said all along, we do not support mandatory vaccinations. We support people's choice.
Union Secretary John Setka claims the violence isn't coming from his members and blames so-called professional protesters.
There was a small contingent of our members there, but the vast majority of them were like people I don't know, like from neo-Nazis to all these extreme, just professional protesters.
But there's now a public debate about the extent these protests are driven by union members or anti-lockdown activists.
Anyone who looks at the footage can see there's not a Nazi symbol anywhere in that crowd.
I've seen on right-wing groups, they're moving this. I'm a tradie, I'm fully vaccinated. To me, they just come across as just uneducated and just scared. They're idiots, sorry.
It'd be silly to try to paint all protesters as far right. There are obviously people out there in the community who are upset about this, who may be attempting to express their views through protest, whether or not that's right or wrong, particularly in lockdown.
Wow. Police cars were attacked in the city. Then in the afternoon, protesters surprised police by leaving the city and storming one of Melbourne's busiest roads, blocking traffic for hours on the Westgate Freeway.
I would say there will be a very small percentage of union members out there today. There are 300,000 construction workers just in Victoria. That is such a small percentage of that industry. Union people don't have brand new, shiny high-vis. They have well-worn uniforms. And mostly on those material, what you'll see is union logos. You saw very little of that today. This is about an anti-vaccination protest. And the demands were of anti-vaxxers as well. They weren't union-type demands.
Those who study far-right groups believe they're using anti-lockdown and restriction sentiment to boost their numbers.
The far-right are attempting to mobilise, they're attempting to recruit, and they're attempting to grow. There's been an historical animosity directed towards trade unions by the far right throughout history. And so by showing up at a CFMEU protest and attempting to claim that they're representing the workers, this is an attempt to mobilise amongst a group of people they might otherwise not be able to reach.
Researcher Joshua Roos says the longer lockdowns go on, the more these groups are likely to grow.
COVID, if anything, has acted to break down, I suppose, bonds of trust with government and authority. We've been now in lockdown, almost the world's longest lockdown here in Melbourne. And so over time, people lose trust, people lose their jobs, there's a stronger sense of anxiety and alienation in the wider population. What that offers for the far right is pretty much the perfect precondition for them approaching with a different narrative, saying, well, government's not working for you.
Their goal would be to sort of have some influence in ending lockdowns. But I think these far-right groups are not simply concerned with COVID. They have a wider agenda going on. You have misogynist, white supremacist ideas that are at the core of this. It has traditional ideas of, society. It wants to sort of restore, in some senses, white pride.
I've been blown away at the amount of support that we've had for vaccinations. We've only really had pushback from one or two contractors regarding this. Majority of them have already been fully vaccinated or at least one dose.
Mark Little owns a small construction company in Geelong. He isn't a member of the CFMEU, but due to the industry's shutdown, they now can't go to work.
I'd think that we'd be delayed by at least 3 to 4 weeks, and it'd have to cost our small business at least $30,000 to $35,000.
Rebecca Casson is the CEO of Master Builders Victoria. It supports the vaccine mandate and says small businesses like Mark's are the victims of these protests.
We absolutely condemn the actions of those rioters. They do not represent our industry, and nor do they speak for our workforce. And everyone needs to be clear that for them to come back onto a building and construction site, they must have had the first vaccination or be able to provide proof that they booked that first vaccination.
Victoria, we've been doing this now for 78 weeks. We're trying to find some sort of hope and hang on to that hope because, you know, everyone's past breaking point.
Protesters stayed in the city well into the evening, with concerns there could be more unrest in the days ahead.
Our primary focus is the safety of the public. It has been all day, and we'll continue to try and stop this protest. We will stop this protest, and we will then step back and investigate and hold those to account who need to be held to account.